identify yourself, who you are, and where you're from and what you've done here in Bennettsville. Okay,
Okay.
3, 2, 1, go.
My name is Robert C. Johnson Jr. I'm a retired educator here in Marlboro County. I've been in Bennettsville 49 years. I'm originally from Burkeville, Virginia, but I grew up in Clarendon County, South Carolina. Attended Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte and did my postgraduate work at the University of South Carolina, Columbia.
Columbia. The reason that we're here, obviously, is to talk about a person that you were very close to, a person that was very important to this community, Dr. Jonas Kennedy. Please share with us your memories of Jonas Kennedy.
My first memory of Dr. Jonas Kennedy probably goes back to about 1968. Uh, I was new in town, was trying to find some fraternity brothers, and one of the younger brothers here in town said that there was a group in Cheraw, South Carolina, and in that group was Dr. Jonas Kennedy, and from that point on, uh, Jonas and I, like most frat brothers, we became connected. Uh, I was, I believe, I was his daughter's high school counselor. Uh, that I worked in this business for 40 years, so you kind of have to forgive me but I think I did. I think I worked, and I was her guidance counselor. I guess a very fond memory of Jonas I had of Jonas was we went to a national meeting in New Orleans, and I was the young person in the bunch, and there was another brother who was very close to Jonas by the name of Larry Foster. So so uh, Jonas said, Larry, we got to teach this young man the ropes and make sure we keep him out of trouble in New Orleans. And believe me, they did. Uh, One of the things I remember about Jonas was uh, his philanthropy and what he did for this community, for young people. He sponsored uh, young people to go to college, especially to Claflin University, which was uh, dear to his heart. Uh, and of course, in the in his latter years, he did not come to frat meetings as much as he would like, but when he did come, uh, everybody listened, you know, because he was Jonas, and because Jonas brought wisdom. And one of the things we used to tease Jonas about was the fact that as a farmer and a very successful farmer, uh, for a long time, many people felt that he was the only black farmer in the county. And that was because of volume, how large his operation was. And one of the things that you could do if you knew Jonas well and what he did as a turkey farmer was to ride out to his home somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas. The pastures would be covered white with turkeys everywhere. And by January, you'd go back and you wouldn't see a turkey anywhere. And you would ask, well, wonder where is Jonas now? And somebody would always say, well, Jonas has probably caught the first thing smoking for Africa, which he did a lot. Of course, Jonas traveled. he and his wife. And of course, the work he did in Africa in terms of helping with, with building a school in Africa. Uh, and he was just a humanitarian. And I don't know any other way to put it. He helped so many people here in Marlboro County. He helped farmers. He had a way of. There was one at one time they were trying to yield production of soybeans. He was getting a greater yield than a lot of the other farmers. No one could understand why. But Jonas was using the manure from his turkeys, and he was using it as a fertilizer for his soybeans. And he was yielding more soybeans as far as bushel per acre than a lot of the other farmers did. And I understand that I read something that he did a lot in Africa as far as showing farmers how to improve, you know, their farming techniques. He was to a lot of people who really got to know him. He was a hero in some sense of the word. I remember when he got the highest order in the state of South Carolina that a civilian can get from the state. That was, I think it is called the Order of the Palmetto, if I'm not mistaken. It was, I know it meant a lot to Jonas, but if you knew Jonas, you know, he just went along with the flow, and to the public eye, it might not have seemed like it meant a lot to him, but it did. But Jonas took things in stride, but it was, we felt here in Marlboro County that was a great accomplishment for him. And of course, he was very active, from what I understand, with the Methodist Church here in this area. And when you needed something, if Jonas could help you with it, he'd do it.
And as a follow up to that question, your statements, there are, it's always, you always have, like my wife always say, no good, no good deed goes. Um, what's just always say something about good deed, people not appreciating it.
Mm-hmm.
In some circles in Bennettsville, some people will make comments to me just in doing my little background research.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why are you doing research on him? You know, what has he done to help anybody here in Bennettsville? And I was like saying to myself, well, he goes man with a legacy. And why is everybody, well, not everybody, why are some people so negative? And everything that I heard today from different people, and starting with you just said about him helping people, why do you think there's like this misunderstanding of who he was and what he did with people?
Right.
Mr. Johnson, for all Mr. Kennedy did in the community and globally and at Claflin, there's still those sometimes who give you the feeling that they really didn't know him or what he did for the community, or for that matter, if he did anything for the community.
Mm-hmm.
And almost to the point of saying like, why are you doing anything? Why are you doing this project about him? Your response to that?
My response would be, because Jonas didn't seek glory, because He didn't seek accolades. Many people probably didn't even know what he was doing. And but those who were close to the situation knew the type of things that Jonas Kennedy was doing for his local community, uh, for the state as a whole, uh, and in some sense for the world, because of his many travels to Africa and back, and those things that he had done. So I think maybe because he wasn't out there as a maybe as a politician or a real out there as a real community advocate as being vocal, a lot of people probably didn't understand him or and didn't realize what he was doing because he didn't do things uh, for accolades for himself. He did it for humanity.
How would you think, how from your perception, how important was Level Green to Jonas Kennedy, and for that matter, his acts of faith and strong beliefs in God to Jonas Kennedy?
Well, I think the best way I can put that is that because uh, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that he was a lifelong member of that church.
Yeah, except for a couple of years here.
For a couple of years,
Michael's.
yeah, when he was at St. Michael, but most of the time he was a lifelong member of Level Green, and I believe that Level Green was dear to his heart, and that's where he was brought up, and I feel that that was probably where uh, his first encounter with relationship spiritually started, and it started in Level Green Church, and of course. For that reason, I feel that Level Green had a special place in his heart.
People have made references to Mr. Kennedy having a strong embracement of his wife, and they even say he called her his queen. He would do anything for her. What was your perception of that relationship, and what helped make Mr. Kennedy a total person, a human being, a lover, and a
Hmm.
friend?
Hmm. Well, you know, when I first met Jonas, you know, Miss Kennedy was there. They did things together. They went places together. Uh, where you saw Jonas, you saw Det. Where you saw Det, you saw Jonas. And the best way I can put that probably is behind every strong man, there's a strong woman. And I think that in itself lies with the relationship of, and he loved Det to death. I know that. And that was the way I saw them. They worked together, and of course, uh, I didn't know her as well as I knew Jonas because I got to know Jonas in his latter years. But she was a very strong woman, and she meant a lot to Jonas, and Jonas meant a great deal to her.
You speak of this morning talking to his daughter. She talks so much about how her father influenced her, even to now, where they had their differences, she had her issues, but she really feels now that she misses him because of the fact of the things that she really learned from him, even if she didn't tell him as much as he wanted to when she was coming up. You know, all young kids are that way. We tend to
Mm-hmm.
miss our parents, or when they're gone, don't tell them what we really felt. So, how did you see his relationship with his daughter?
Well, from what I could tell, uh, I first got to know Dee Dee when she was a student at Bennettsville High School. And what can I say? Dee Dee was much like uh, my kids and a lot of other kids. She was a typical teenager. And, you know, sometimes teenagers uh, tend to think that their parents don't believe in what they are doing, but they do. And I think in Jonah's own way, he loved Dee Dee and supported her in everything she did. And and uh, and of course she was an only child. So you know, but all in all, from what I could tell from a distance, that she, as older she got, the closer I think she got to her father, especially after her mother died.
Another question. Mr. Kenny and I would talk about this on occasion, not on tape, but just
Mm-hmm.
casual conversation. He never seemed to spend a lot of time dealing with race, not liking this person because they were white, this
Mm-hmm.
person because they were black. Always seemed to be very complimentary to people, and even the white people I've spoken to about him, Jerry Kendall wrote a book about Bennettsville,
Yeah.
and I'm going to talk to the author, the former publisher of the Bennettsville paper, Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Billy
Bill Kinney.
Bill Kinney.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, how do you think he dealt with issues being in the South? You know, when there were good times and bad times in the South, like there now there are good times and bad times in the North in terms of just
Mm-hmm.
racial relationship. He seemed to be a very calm person about those kind of issues and had his own way of dealing with it. How did you observe anything about him in those meetings?
I think from what I could tell with with Mr. Kennedy is he took you where you were and he dealt with you in his own way, and he had a lot of wisdom. And I think he was the type of person who knew when to step out and knew when to step back a little bit and knew when to say what he had to say, and then knew when to maybe compromise. And I think his stature in the community was such that people respected him for who he was. Uh, in the South, here's a black man. He's a landowner. He's a businessman. And he knew how to handle his affairs. So he had a way of doing things that maybe some of other of us would not have be able to deal. But he knew how to deal with people, and I think that was the difference probably between Mr. Kennedy and some other people.
Um, if you were to like summarize the life of Jonas Kennedy in like a paragraph or so, a few words or so, how would you remember and define his legacy that he had as an African American man, who history hasn't been too kind to, because for the most part, be it direct the camera person, Fred, until him and I met, he never heard of Mr. Kennedy. People up in Spartanburg don't know about Mr. Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
People in Charlotte don't know about Mr. Kennedy. And even take it a step further, people in Bennettsville don't know about Mr. Kennedy. That's one of the main reasons also why Mr. Kendall wrote the book about the African American in Bennettsville, because they had a history of people
Mm-hmm.
successful bankers and doctors
Mm-hmm.
and lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, if you don't write your history, someone else will. And too often when Mr. Kendall told me when he wrote the book himself, people said, well, why are you writing that book? You're a white man. And he said, well, nobody else is writing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm writing history. So,
Mm-hmm.
so where do you think Mr. Kennedy's legacy will stand, and what needs to be done to further his legacy to the next generation that's coming up now? So they know about certain people that we always talk about,
Mm-hmm.
be it Harriet Tubman, be it Martin Luther King, be it Malcolm X. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you think we can help
I-
reinstill that whole legacy of Mr. Kennedy in
I-
history?
I think those of us who knew Dr. Kennedy remember him as a caring man. They knew him as a businessman. They knew him as a man who was very, very passionate about education, and he knew he was also the type of person who, in his own way, wanted to help his community and help his state if he could, and the world. And I think of so many people who he sponsored to go to college, for instance. I've talked to kids who you would never dream of, and they would say, or their parents would say, well, Mr. Kennedy helped me go to college, especially kids who were going to Claflin University. And just what he did in terms of its help establishing a school in Africa. And I think that's what some people might say, well, why did he go over there? Maybe maybe that was his mission. And that's what he felt he needed to do. But I would say that his legacy will always be, for those of us who knew him, that he was a humanitarian, he was a businessman, he was a friend, he was a Christian, he was a philanthropist, and in his own way, he did what he could to better mankind.
Thank you. Anything that I've missed? I've been doing this all day, so like pretty much know what I want to ask. I didn't have my notes out in my pocket. But is there anything I think I missed? I should ask you about. Cover it, because I can do it. It's not a problem.
The only thing I would say is that
Okay, let's let it roll. Let it roll. Okay.
the only
So let's just say, let's start on 1, 2, 3. The one thing I would say is 1, 2, 3, go.
one of the things I would say about Jonas was when you got to know him, he was a pretty fun guy to be around, even in his old age. And I can imagine on one occasion, a couple of us went to see him in his latter years at his home. And when we walked in, he looked around. It was about 5 of us. And he said, what you Kappa boys coming in here for? What y'all want? and And we said, we don't want any money today, Jonas. We're just coming to see how you getting along. Because he had been a little ill. And we sat around and just talked about the fraternity, and he and some of the older guys talked about the old times, and we kind of talked about some times, and we had a couple of young guys in there, like my son, who was much younger than the rest of us, and we just had a good time talking, and so that's one of the things that I'd always remember, and I also remember that there were a lot of young men that he mentored who worked for him on his farm. Uh, and and of course, like I said before, it's just so many people that he sponsored that we'd never dream of, didn't even know. Uh, but he was a fun guy to be around once you knew him, and I'll always remember him as a man who had a plan and he made it work. And humanitarian, philanthropist, businessman, and that's about it, what I could say about a dear brother of mine, Dr. Jonas Kennedy.
Thank you very much. Fred, anything else you think of? Okay. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, let's go back to our discussions about Mr. Kennedy's grandson, who you knew and
Yeah,
mentored and
right,
into get to
right.
etc.
His grandson, Alex Mills, he wanted so much for him to be a part of Kappa, and was hoping that he would get in during his lifetime, and unfortunately he didn't. And however, this past spring, Alex became a member of the Greenville Alumni Chapter in Greenville, South Carolina. And I put in a plug for him by simply saying, hey, look, that young man was the grandson of one of our brothers here in the Cheraw Alumni Chapter. And we felt that he would be a good candidate for Kappa Alpha Psi. And of course, well, Alex had already done the work anyway. He was already in, but we just wanted to let him know that we down here at Cheraw Alumni knew who the young man was, and that his grandfather had been a life member of Kappa Alpha Psi. So in a sense, he was a legacy.
So you can say that Mr. Kennedy's had a great affection and love for his grandson
Mm-hmm.
in terms of all things he had done and what he wanted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And because he, well, I guess in any case, I'm a grandfather, and you know, I'm crazy about both of my grandsons, and always want them to do well, and he was a typical grandfather with the love he had for his grandson.